American flag, American flag. Why are the roads all so straight? And why are they all called 10th Street? American flag. So Sarah asks, what differences have you noticed between musical tastes in England versus America? Well, that's a great question, and to answer that, I'm going to have to go to the den. I've been staying with an American friend for the last few months, and this is the bedroom that they built for me. So I can't claim to be an expert on either England or America, but I have lived in America for the last 2 years, so I just wanted to share some of the things that I noticed. The first thing that I want to say about musical taste is I think that music is definitely reflected in the national characteristics of both England and America. So America, to me, is a very optimistic place. You know, it's reflected in the American dream, the way people are brought up to believe that they can become anything, versus England, where I feel like there's a lot more cynicism in the air, perhaps a lot more realism, but also there's not such an optimistic cheerfulness about the way in which people interact with each other. American people are a lot more forward, outgoing and cheerful, whereas British people are a lot more self-effacing. As I say, these are just generalizations, but I think they hold true in a lot of cases. So what does that mean for music? You listen to Copland's Appalachian Spring or Barber's Summer of Knoxville, 1915, things like that, and there's this real optimism or sort of bliss, love of country, happiness, cheerfulness about the thing, even if it is sometimes nostalgic. The music is quite simply cheerful and positive, a bit like its poetry. I always think of something like Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. British people in general dare not be quite so positive if they want to fit in. And so I think British music does still display this love of country, except it's more self-effacing. It's not so much cheerful as this kind of still waters run deep. It's more reserved. It's more of a kind of controlled emotion, and I think that's reflected in the general British character. Think of ELGAR, who was so often inspired by the Cotswolds and the British countryside, his first symphony, or NIMROD, or the cello concerto. It's a totally different kind of emotion from Appalachian Spring. A second point is that the roots of American music are entirely different from any European music. American classical music is heavily influenced by jazz, blues, African-American music, which is the real American music. And so when you listen to something like Rhapsody in Blue or Copland's Piano Concerto, you're hearing music which has an entirely different cultural history to the music of European classical. American classical music, to me, seems to be the result of this melting pot of different cultures. Another thing I definitely noticed is that Americans prefer new to old in general. I understand that in some point in the last 60 years or so, a lot of old buildings were knocked down and replaced with something new, and that means that there's not quite the same sense of cultural heritage and being tied to the past as there is in Europe. There was definitely a leaning towards performing more new music than old music, whereas England is a lot more connected to a sort of heritage and to its past, and sometimes that means that we wind up getting stuck in the past. So many people that I knew in America were so keen to help each other along, perform each other's works, and really get stuck into new music more than old music. And I think that this comes from an early age in American education. I went to a conference in Kansas City which was filled with teachers. It was centered around music education. And it took me several days to realize that the attitude there was, it's not about the music, it's about the kids and what the kids need. These teachers would literally program music that they felt would resonate the most with their kids, and that meant that there was a definite leaning towards modern music over old music. The attitude in my school in England, on the other hand, was, it's not really about you, it's about the music, and you might not like this work right now, but it's a masterpiece and we're doing it, so get over it. I think the healthiest attitude is a little bit of both. Classical music is sometimes hard to understand. It's like Shakespeare. You don't simply say, let's not do Shakespeare because it's difficult to understand for kids. But I think it's such a healthy attitude to keep encouraging modern composers to compose for their institutions. I think a good music education comes from a connection to the past, the amazing heritage of music that we've inherited, and a projection into the future of what can we contribute to this heritage and what can we pass on to the next generation. Most interestingly, I think a lot of the music that I heard in America simply wouldn't survive across the Atlantic, because that kind of cheerfulness, that kind of emotional openness just doesn't go down well in Britain. That's not to say that we're not emotional people, we are, but we're not the sort of culture that tends to wear their hearts on their sleeves. And so while I loved so much of the American music that I wound up performing, I'm not sure some of it will ever get performed in Britain for that exact reason. And maybe there's some British pieces or British art which just doesn't translate well in America too. Anyway, I'm going to be hosting a listening party very soon, details in the description, but we're going to be listening to a classic American piece of music and a classic British piece of music, and we'll be comparing them and comparing the different atmospheres and characters in each one. These listening parties have been really great fun in the past, so I really hope you'll join me for that. If you have any questions to ask, then just leave them in the comments, and let me know what you think about the difference between American and British musical cultures. Do subscribe if you want to see more on classical music and art music and film music and that kind of thing, and I'll see you very soon. Thank you for watching.